412A, November 15th, 2025. On the frozen runway of El Libertador Air Base, two Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons sat trembling under engine pressure. Nearly 40 years old, these airframes had cost the Venezuelan government over $22 million each in maintenance and upgrades. Tonight, they weren't training. They were flying into a disaster no one had planned for. Captain Luis Herrera and Lieutenant Carlos Mejia took off at 4:19 a.m. Their jets consumed 22,000 pounds of fuel per hour as they accelerated eastward across the Caribbean Sea. They dropped to 160 feet above the water, so low that a single wave could slap the underside of the aircraft in less than a third of a second. But low-altitude flight meant staying beneath American radar. That was the entire strategy. For the first 20 minutes, everything looked normal. Calm sea, no radar contacts, no American response. Then at 37 nautical miles, something changed. Mejia's radar screen lit up with a contact 12 times larger than a destroyer, a thermal signature stretching 330 meters long, a moving mass equivalent to 100,000 tons of steel. Luis? That's not Echo 7, Mejia said, his voice getting tighter with each word. The target they were hunting wasn't a 9,000-ton destroyer, it was the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN 78. A nuclear-powered supercarrier carrying 70 strike aircraft, shielded by 6 escort warships, capable of erasing any threat in under 15 seconds, 2 aging Venezuelan F-16 seconds were flying straight into it. But they didn't know that yet. The intelligence packet had been transmitted 18 hours earlier. In the Caribbean, 18 hours was an eternity. A carrier strike group could shift 30 to 45 nautical miles overnight. The tactical map had completely rewritten itself. No one told these pilots. At 5:01 a.m., just as the Venezuelan jets dropped to 120 feet above the waves, the entire battlefield snapped into focus. Herrera's radar screen, an aging APG-66 built in the 1980s, struggled to process the returning echoes. Instead of a compact destroyer silhouette, his scope displayed a radar cross-section the size of an 18-story building laid on its side, a steel mass over 330 meters long. The display nearly spilled outside its frame. Herrera had no time to question it. Caracas wanted footage. A close pass, a warning run, something bold enough for morning television back home. He pushed the throttle forward. The F-16 surged to 510 knots, its Pratt & Whitney engine roaring with 14,900 pounds of thrust. The jet skimmed through humid Caribbean air, low enough for sea spray to kiss the landing gear doors. At 5 a.m., Herrera squeezed the trigger for exactly 1.2 seconds. 34 tracer rounds stitched into the water. Just intimidation. Just a gesture meant to warn away what he thought was a destroyer. But on the American side, every alarm erupted at once. At 5:10 a.m., every ship in Carrier Strike Group 2 registered the maneuver. The USS Gridley went into full combat escalation. Missile doors opened. Weapons officers took their stations. The close-in weapons system, the CIWS, a gun that could fire 4,500 rounds per minute, spun up. Its barrels glowed dimly in the pre-dawn darkness. The Spy 1D radar locked onto the F-16 with such precision that operators could see the micro-movements in the aircraft's wings. Above them, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets had already launched, dropping from 5,000 feet to intercept. The Super Hornets rolled inverted, diving at Mach 0.95, locking onto both F-16 seconds from 1.9 miles away. A missile would need only 6 seconds to hit. Herrera saw the lock. He heard the warning tone. He felt the cockpit tremble as American fire control radar painted him with technology from a completely different century than his own. He realized too late that Echo 7 had never been a destroyer. He had just fired a warning burst at a $7.5 billion nuclear aircraft carrier. The Caribbean sky shifted from darkness to steel gray. The distance between the Super Hornets and the two Venezuelan F-16 seconds had shrunk to 2.1 miles, far too close for any mistake. From the flight deck, air control confirmed hostile jets descending to 120 feet. Rules of engagement shifted. Stand by for counterforce. The two Super Hornets were carrying 4 AIM-120Ds, 2 AIM-9Xs, and the AAQ-28 targeting system. Each could lock onto a target at 160 kilometers, but today they didn't need range, they needed pressure. Force the Venezuelans to back off or slip up. Below them, Herrera felt the airframe shake harder by the minute. The F-16's warning system emitted a long, sharp, piercing tone. The Americans were locking on, red lights flashed, high priority threat, missile lock. At 5:11 a.m., USS Gridley and USS John Finn shifted to combat level 3. The CIWS rotated a full 360 degrees, locking firmly onto both F-16 seconds. One wrong move, even a mistake, and the system could launch 5 missiles at Mach 2.5, hitting targets in 4 to 5 seconds. The entire carrier group switched to cooperative engagement capability. 6 ships, 28 radars, 42 antennas, 1 combat brain processing 1.8 million signals per second. It left the 2 F-16 seconds exposed, naked over the sea. At 5:14 a.m., Super Hornet number 204 locked onto Mejia's F-16 from 1.6 miles. At that range, if the US pulled the trigger, an AIM-9X would reach its target in 3.9 seconds. Inside the F-16 cockpit, the air thickened. Herrera shouted over the radio, "Carlos, break left now." But the Americans had already cut off the escape route. Super Hornet 211 dove in from the right, forming a tightening pincer. At 5:17 a.m., the Pentagon transmitted a command code to USS Gridley, DEFCON Air Level 2, non-lethal dominance authorized. The US would not fire, but they would crush the opponent's will. Force an unconditional retreat. USS Gridley fired 2 Mark 58 marker flares, creating a 900-meter column of fire, a burning line across the Caribbean. Cross 1 more nautical mile and this becomes war. At 5:18 a.m., the 2 Super Hornets screamed past the noses of the 2 F-16 seconds at a distance of only 190 meters. So close that a deviation of just 3 degrees would cause a mid-air collision. Wind roared against the canopy like metal being cut, radar lock tones blared non-stop. The Venezuelan pilots understood. They were no longer the hunters, they were prey. But the Americans weren't done applying pressure. At 5:19 a.m., the Caribbean sky cracked open with a long metallic shriek. After 18 minutes of non-lethal suppression, the 2 F-16 seconds still held their course. They were trying to maintain a no-retreat posture, trying to report something back to Caracas that didn't look like total failure. From the deck of USS Gridley, the RIM 116B Ram received its first command of the morning. Weapons hot, tracking priority F-16-1. The sensors rotated 72 degrees left, hard locking onto Herrera's F-16. Less than 0.6 seconds later, a 2.8-meter CIWS missile launched at Mach 2.4, tearing through the air like a blade. Herrera heard only one sound: missile inbound. 2 seconds to impact, 2 seconds. He yanked the control stick. The F-16 rolled 74 degrees left, pulling G-forces that nearly exceeded the wing structure limits. The white exhaust plume from the CIWS missile grazed past at only 41 meters from the cockpit, close enough to peel paint off the right wing. But the United States was not going to miss twice. At 5:20 a.m., the 2 Super Hornets, already in perfect encirclement, shifted from warning to combat termination. The pilot of aircraft 211 dropped to 310 feet, locking onto Mejia's F-16 at 1.4 miles. On the HUD, the indicator was clear: AIM-9X, 98% probability of kill. Mejia knew exactly what that number meant. At 5:21 a.m., Super Hornet 211 fired. A white spear of light shot forward like a plasma javelin, launching at 1,600 kilometers per hour, then accelerating to Mach 2 in 1.3 seconds. It locked onto the target via infrared seeker following the heat of the F-16's engine, the only hot object against the Blue Sea. Mejia attempted an escape maneuver, a Cobra Split S, nose down, rolling over, diving toward the surface, but the F-16 was a 1980s design. Its control system responded 34% slower than an F-18. He couldn't outrun fate. The AIM-9X hit at 27 meters above the waves, detonating with the compression force of 9 kilograms of PBX-112 explosive. Fire ballooned into a sphere, slicing the F-16 inches half like a hot blade through foil. Mejia's biometric signal vanished from the network in 0.04 seconds. Herrera saw only a flash, then a column of black smoke. At 5:22 a.m., inside the remaining F-16, oxygen levels dropped as backup systems overloaded. Herrera screamed, his voice shaking like compressed metal. "I'm hit. Carlos is gone. I'm disengaging. Disengaging." But the United States does not stop when the enemy begins to run. The two Super Hornets banked, reacquiring Herrera at 1.8 miles, projected kill time, 6 seconds. The Caribbean was entering the moment where one more decision would turn an incident into a full-scale regional war. At 5:23 a.m. on USS Gridley, the Spy-1D fire control system built a glowing red data mesh around the F-16. Radar precision at that moment reached 0.004 degrees, equivalent to tracking a metal coin from 23 kilometers away. This was no longer monitoring, this was a countdown to elimination. The two Super Hornets tightened their circle. Distance, 1.8 miles, 1.7, 1.6. On the American pilot's HUD, the line appeared. AIM-120D. Time to impact. 6 seconds. 6 seconds. 6 seconds to decide peace or war. At 5:24 a.m., inside the USS Gerald R. Ford combat room, Captain Mark Dalton watched every parameter. Herrera's speed, his altitude, his flight angle. Any deviation beyond plus or minus 9 degrees was classified as a pre-attack maneuver. Any acceleration above 0.3 G was defined as an immediate threat. On the CIC main screen, the F-16 icon flickered yellow, then red. It was accelerating. Not much. Only 11 knots. But for the US Automatic Threat Identification System, that was enough to trigger a Level 1 missile launch condition. Two weapons officers called out in unison, "Target escalating. Request permission to fire." No one in the CIC said another word. No one breathed loudly. The entire 333-meter ship sank into silence like a metal monument awaiting judgment. Super Hornet Pilot 211 felt the tension in the control stick ease. The auto-fire system was preparing to take over. The armed light turned on. Target lock shifted to solid red. Herrera screamed into the radio, his voice cracking like shattered glass. "I'm breaking off! No weapons! No weapons! I'm climbing out of the zone!" He pulled the stick, pushed the F-16 up to 1,200 feet, shut down all radar illumination systems, dropped speed to 290 knots, dangerously low for a fighter aircraft. In the CIC, the red icon shifted to orange, then blue. The American pilot exhaled. The auto-launch system canceled the firing sequence. The AIM-120D froze its countdown at 3 seconds. A regional war had just been avoided because one pilot chose to let go of the trigger. At 5:25 a.m., the Super Hornets drifted to both sides, escorting the Venezuelan pilot out of U.S. waters at a monitoring distance of 2.4 miles. No one spoke, no one smiled. That silence sometimes is the victory. On a morning when death was only 3 seconds away, restraint became the most powerful weapon on the battlefield. But the real battle was just beginning. By 5:40 a.m., USS Gerald R. Ford had already uploaded the initial cooperative engagement capability combat log. 19.2 gigabytes of radar tracks, thermal trails, weapon system triggers, cockpit audio. Within minutes, it reached the Pentagon and the White House Situation Room. Analysts didn't even need to zoom in. The data told a brutal, simple truth. The Venezuelan jets had fired first, descended to strike altitude, refused all radio warnings, but in Caracas, the truth was treated like an intruder. At 6:10 a.m., President Narciso Navarro appeared on national television, voice-controlled but trembling beneath the surface. Two of our brave pilots were attacked without provocation by an American carrier. We demand international condemnation. Venezuela will not be intimidated. 2 words sent the region spiraling. Attacked, provocation. By 8 a.m., the global news cycle exploded. U.S. shoots down Venezuelan fighter jet. Dogfight over the Caribbean. American carrier provokes incident. F-16 down. Region on edge. Washington's truth evaporated beneath headlines. Fear filled the gaps. At 10:14 a.m., the UN meeting opened. Venezuela spoke first, raising its voice dramatically. Our pilots followed international air protocols. The United States violated sovereignty. Ambassador Catherine Riley from the U.S. delegation pressed a button. The lights dimmed. Raw cooperative engagement system data filled the screens. Frame by frame, radar tracks materialized. Not polished graphics, but actual system information. The altitude drops. The 1.2-second burst. The pincer formation of Super Hornets. The 900-meter warning line. The red escalation flag triggered at plus 11 knots. Then the cockpit capture. I'm hit, Carlos is gone, I'm disengaging. Everyone understood. He was fleeing, not attacking. Riley spoke only 13 words. These are not opinions. These are machine-verified combat records. Diplomats shifted. Notes were scribbled. Defense attachés whispered into secure phones. The Venezuelan claim collapsed under thermographic evidence. But the US did not seek humiliation, they sought prevention. Riley ended with a line that would be quoted for years. War is often born from minutes of confusion and days of pride. We ask this body to choose clarity over pride. Outside the UN, the media spun the day into a hurricane. Inside, strategists understood. Diplomacy had bought time, but not safety. When Herrera landed at 11:32 a.m., ground crews filmed his F-16 from multiple angles, panels scorched, intake vents charred, oxygen line ruptures. Every image contradicted the official government narrative. But the regime needed a hero and a story. By noon, state-controlled media declared Herrera a defender of sovereignty while quietly erasing every technical detail. Then came the unexpected blow. Leaked footage from naval radar stations showed Venezuelan command had been using 18-hour-old intelligence, fatal negligence in maritime warfare. The footage went viral. Military bloggers, opposition figures, even former generals attacked the government online. They sent pilots into a trap with outdated data. This wasn't bravery, this was incompetence. Inside the Air Force High Command, fractures deepened. Some generals demanded confrontation with the US to restore honor. Others warned a full war would end in national ruin within days. When the last Venezuelan F-16 vanished beyond the edge of American waters, the Caribbean finally exhaled. The sea looked calm again. The horizon softened under the first hints of daylight. But everyone inside Carrier Strike Group 2 knew the truth. They had just survived the kind of mourning that entire regions are lost to. Nothing in the gentle waves revealed how close the hemisphere had come to a firestorm. But in the minds of sailors who watched red threat indicators flare across screens, one fact echoed like a heartbeat. War had stopped with only 3 seconds to spare. For the United States Navy, the morning became a testament to a different kind of power, the kind that holds rather than strikes. Every American system, from CIWS to cooperative engagement to the Super Hornets tightening their pincer, proved decisive dominance. They had complete control of the battle space. They could have fired with zero doubt about the outcome. Yet the greatest demonstration of strength they gave the world was restraint. They chose clarity over anger, precision over pride, stability over the easy temptation of overwhelming force. On the other side of the sky, Captain Luis Herrera faced the most human moment of the entire crisis. His jet was failing, his oxygen was dropping, his sensors were collapsing one by one. But he made the choice that saved thousands of lives across a dozen cities. He disengaged. No bravado, no last gesture, no political theater. Just a pilot who realized surviving, not escalating, was the only sane path left. His final climb to 1,200 feet. His shutdown of emitters. His desperate drop to 290 knots. These weren't signs of defeat. They were signs of clarity. In a world drowning in pride, Herrera chose reason. History will remember this morning not for how close it came to war, but for how deliberately it stepped back from the edge. And in that small, vanishing space where restraint defeated pride, the Caribbean kept its sunrise. Subscribe to see the stories nobody else is telling.